Director of the Grua Center. It's my pleasure to welcome you tonight on this very cold evening, but the snow's not here yet. Do we have any audience members here for the first time? Oh, we do. A special welcome to you. Glad you're here. I always start with some housekeeping items first. If you've not yet turned off your cell phone, now's the time to do so. Reach in your bag, your pockets. Tonight we're going to hear from our speakers for about 45 minutes, and we'll have a question and answer session, and we're going to have a tasting, which is very cool. Finally, I want to take this opportunity to thank the many people who support the Grua Center via our annual fund. I know some of you are here tonight. It makes our year-round programming possible here, but it doesn't cover all of our costs, which is why we put our donation box right smack down in the middle of the doorway. So if you don't get it on the way in, you might want to get it on the way out. On to our talk. We have different names for our lecture series, and this one falls into two of them. We have a food, fitness, and fun category, but also local treasures. Stone Acres Farm is a 65-acre farm that dates back to the Revolutionary War. Isn't that cool? Talk about history. Clearly things have changed a good deal since that time, but especially in the last couple of years. And that's why we've asked them to come talk to us about what they're up to. I'm personally delighted that they have a farm stand, which in the summer makes it very easy for me to stop by on my way home in 01, because I head out to the freeway. And also the farm sources much of the food for three of my favorite restaurants, Oyster Club, Engine Room, and Grass and Bone, all in Mystic. We have three speakers tonight. Two of them are farmer Meek and Joe Rothman, who heads the farm's education work. But I'm particularly delighted to call out the farm's director of operations. She was my predecessor here as executive director of the Grua Center for 5 years. So we're so happy to have you back here. Please welcome Jane Meiser.
It is great to be back. I have to say, I've definitely been back several times in the last couple of years since taking over operations at Stone Acres. And hopefully, as we settle into the next couple of years, we'll be able to come back again to enjoy some programming, which I love. But it's a thrill to be on this side of the podium tonight. It's the first time. So thank you guys all for coming. As Lori mentioned, Stone Acres has been around for a long time, and what I wanted to do tonight is sort of set the stage, talk a little bit about the history of Stone Acres, what we're doing now, but then pass the mic over to Andy Meek, our Director of Farming Operations, to talk about what he's doing on the farm, which is really the core of our mission at Stone Acres, and then to Jen Rothman, who's the Executive Director at the Yellow Farmhouse Education Center, which is our main nonprofit on site. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of historical context here. Stone Acres Farm was founded back in 1765 as a provision farm for its landowners and the community, and has been in continual operation, as Lori mentioned, before the Revolutionary War. Its original land spanned approximately 225 acres and spread out on both the east and the west sides of North Main Street. The first building to be constructed on site was the Manor House in 1765, which you can see in this picture is the back portion of the house. By the original owner, Dr. Phelps. After his death in the early 1800s, his family continued to live on the property, and his grandson, Charles Phelps, who was a sea captain and merchant in New Orleans and was involved in paving the streets in both New Orleans and Alabama, added the front stately portion of the Manor House, which is more recognizable today and what you probably see if you are driving up and down North Main Street. After his death on the steamship Lexington, the house and the property passed from generation to generation, eventually ending up in the ownership of Dr. Frederick Pafford in the 1930s, and through his family, and mine, for the next 75 years until its sale in 2015, several years ago. Over the many years in operation, the farm has served as a gathering place for the community, including a refuge site for many historic town events. During the Battle of Stonington in 1814, the house was converted to a makeshift hospital and used to house villagers from the attack in Stonington Harbor. And over 100 years later, in the hurricane of 1938, the The house sheltered many stranded train passengers whose train derailed with the high winds and tides in Stonington Harbor as well. The house is now used as a different type of gathering space. We host seasonal farm dinners inside the stately dining room and also welcome artists in residency, including songwriters, poets, and authors. And this year, we will be introducing a chef in residency program within the same space. Looking back and moving on, from a provision farm in the early 1900s, a dairy farm was started on site and milk was bottled and distributed around town. In 1946, the old dairy barn that was once located just east of the still standing farmhouse was struck by lightning and destroyed by a fire. That farm building is one of the only original buildings on site that is not still standing. In addition to vast fields, vegetable gardens, and the former dairy farm, Stone Acres has beautiful ornamental gardens dating back to the early 19th century. And if any of you have been in the gardens now, I have a couple of pictures of them, you'll see that a very similar gazebo is still there. The one thing that's missing in this photo is the boxwood hedges. The property is currently home to over 40 varieties of daffodils and hundreds of varieties of plants, flowers, and trees, including the quarter-mile of boxwood bushes that frame the formal garden. The gazebo, fish pond, and rose arbors located in the former garden were also placed there in the late 1800s. The gardens today are as lush and as beautiful as they were many years ago. This is a current picture of what the gardens look like, so if you haven't been there in the summertime, please come visit. It really is gorgeous. Also located on the site are two historic greenhouses that are some of the oldest in the state. The smaller one dates back to the 1830s and is still used for seed propagation, and the larger greenhouse, called the Grapery, produced fresh citrus and grapes year-round for the landowners and is currently used for perennial plantings. And this is an old picture of the grapes growing in the Grapery. So with that brief history of the property, which is, as I mentioned, is important to understand as we move into the present day in the next 250 years. So what are we doing now and where are we going? Is probably why many of you are here tonight. Looking forward, in 2015, the property was sold out of the family and was purchased by a group of like-minded investors, some of whom are descendants of the original owners. The current investors and board set forth to develop a master plan that would position Stone Acres to become a regional resource for vegetables and flowers, artisanal products, events, workshops, art programming, and educational activities, all while preserving a historic property and celebrating open space. One of the biggest challenges that small farms have today, especially in Connecticut, is that it becomes almost financially impossible to maintain some of these larger properties, maintain the buildings, maintain the grounds, repair the equipment, etc., etc. So as a new ownership group, we were charged with figuring out how to create a plan that would protect the historic and agricultural character of the property, maintain long-term viability of the property, and open it up to the public while introducing low-impact commercial activity on site that would drive revenues and support our larger farm program. To that end, we met with the town and community leaders and developed a new floating zone in the town of Stonington called the Agricultural Heritage District, or the AHD. This new designation directly applies to over 25 different properties in the town and is intended to preserve Stonington's cultural landscape by permitting various flexible economic uses while providing an alternative to the undesirable conversion of agricultural lands to residential subdivisions. So phase one of Stone Acres is what we're going through right now, and we decided that the first step that we really needed to do was to reestablish the farm, Stone Acres as a working farm, a public space, and an educational community. We looked at the farm property as roughly 4 quadrants related to the character and use of the farm as a new enterprise. Areas directly associated with heritage and agrarian practices, artisanal work, and a retail marketplace. We hired a farm director, Andy Meek, and with his team, he built 3 new high tunnels, or what we call the modern-day greenhouse, which houses all of our winter production and summer specialty produce. We also refurbished a former farm shed to serve as our seasonal 7-day-a-week farm stand on site, which Lori was talking about. And we've also established a robust farming program that Andy will get into more during his talk, including a 150-person CSA for vegetables and flowers, CSA, which stands for Community Supported Agriculture or Weekly Farm Shares, when you prepay into a share during this time of year when farms are strapped for cash flow because we don't have as much product going out. But we also need to be purchasing a lot of our seeds, compost, other soil amendments at this time, so we actually have a lot of cash that is going out at the same time as well. We have many wholesale relationships with other local restaurants, including the ones that Lori mentioned, but we also work with other restaurants besides my own restaurant group, and retail stores that use our delicious products, and also our farm products serve as a source for the Yellow Farmhouse Education Center. And one of the most important things with the AHG that I mentioned was the low-impact economic or commercial activity. And with that, some of the activity that is now allowed on the Stone Acre site is many outdoor farm dinners, indoor farm dinners, weddings, corporate events, farm festivals, and a variety of other farm-centric programming. We've also started to host, as I mentioned, artist in residency programs, creating space for individuals to reflect and create within the beautiful stone walls of the farm. So there you have it, a little background to get us started. I'd like to now hand this over to Andy, who is our Director of Farming at Stone Acres, to discuss his farming philosophies and many contributions to this project. So with that, Andy, there you go.
So, I want to really focus on my philosophy around farming in my talk tonight. I'm going to start probably further back than is necessary, but it's kind of how I came to farming with no preconceptions about what it was. I walked into farming rather serendipitously in my early 20s without intending to follow this career, and it's made a huge impact on my life. So, we'll start at the very basics. Farming, to me, is at its most fundamental level a manipulation of natural systems to produce the desired growth for your product. It's an activity that takes place within a larger system. It's got a native ecology it needs to work within, the climate, weather, which is different, we all know, and the economy. You cannot forget the economy when you're talking about farming. It's also an activity that's adaptable and executable in a nearly infinite number of ways, and ultimately farming is a product of the farmer's imagination. That's the only limit to what we can do. How it is executed has effects on consumer health, opportunities for education, the ecosystem that it takes place in. Agriculture has changed the face of the planet more than any other human activity. Resilience of our food system in a changing climate also depends on how we go forward with agriculture in the future. So, to me, farming is both an art and a craft. One of my main attractions to it is just getting my hands dirty. So, on some level, my attraction is very simple. I just like to work with my hands. But I also like the creative problem solving that comes with it. There's a real satisfaction to finding the correct economy of effort so that what you're doing has a maximum impact. You have to be rather clever with your time and energies in farming to be able to get anywhere and be economically sustainable. I'm pretty passionate about producing food that has high nutrition and great flavors, which when you're talking about vegetables are really one and the same. If you bite into a vegetable and it's got a lot of flavor, it's synonymous with a lot of nutrition. So a product that tastes good is good. And at the same time, we need to balance all of these sort of altruistic goals in farming with a sustainable business model. For farming like this to succeed, it has to make a little bit of money. By no means is farming a career that will make anyone rich ever, but I do want it to be something that isn't resting on philanthropy. It should be a self-sustaining system. So, let's see. I guess at this point I'll get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty of what I think is important in a farming system. Starting at the bottom is soil health. It's a largely invisible foundation for your entire farm. So it's very important to me that we focus not just on getting big plants with heavy harvests, but on producing the healthy soil that contributes to the nutrition of the plants. So a couple of techniques that I employ in that is reducing our tillage as much as possible. Anytime you disturb the soil, you are upsetting a very delicate ecosystem. I find it necessary to do in small amounts, but I want to stay away from excessive disturbance of the soil. It allows microorganisms to grow and thrive and improves the water retention and distribution and creates a soil structure that can hold the fertility that is in it. Another part of fostering a sort of stable fertility is using non-soluble fertilizers. So many standard fertilizers that have been used a lot in the past 50 years of agriculture are water soluble, meaning they go where the water goes, which is why we see so many problems with phosphorus runoff and algae blooms in the Great Lakes and in the Gulf of Mexico, and poisoned aquifers where toxic fertilizers get to groundwater. So not only is that a bad consequence, but it's not creating healthy plants either. So it's kind of a lose-lose as far as I'm concerned. We also use a lot of compost, which is a very stable form of nutrients and really supports a healthy ecosystem within the soil, and many minerals which are not soluble at all. They just stay right there, and the plants access them and break them down over long, long periods of time. So, in growing the ecosystem of the farm, we kind of look at what's going on around us in the fields that we're not disturbing. So, many of you have probably driven up North Main Street and seen in late July, early August, our field full of Queen Anne's lace. This is just happening all on its own. It dominates the visuals in this picture, but there's a lot of different things growing in there. And the Queen Anne's lace is a huge attractor to many beneficial insects that keep the pest pressures down on the rest of the farm. So in any ecosystem, you'll see a huge diversity of different things growing, and that sort of diversity is what leads to, a stable and healthy system. So we try to mimic that in some of our plantings on the farm. We plant many different kinds of flowers right alongside of our vegetables, and this brings in all of the good insects that we want, which are the base of a larger food system as well. So we have pollinators that come in and are attracted by the abundance of flowers and help out our crops while they happen to be there. We have predatory insects that come and use the nectar as a food source and then attack pests for reproductive purposes. And it's also just a habitat. There's a lot of stuff happening in the vegetable garden. They're always in there disturbing it and moving things around. And the flower beds that are interspersed among all of those vegetables are relatively undisturbed part of the gardens during the growing season, which allows praying mantises and all sorts of slower moving but good bugs to have a place to stay while we're busy working everywhere around them. Another thing we do is to try and grow more than one thing in one place. So in this picture you can see we've got some kale with clover planted right under it, and that clover is holding moisture into the soil, it's providing a habitat for all sorts of beneficials. Clover also adds nutrients to the soil and stabilizes other things that might wash out otherwise. Even with organic fertilizers and compost and everything, there is still the danger of leaching when you have bare soil. So we try and cover as much of it as possible. And then to the left of the kale, you can see we've got a row of black-eyed Susans. So there's always flowers that are about on the farm. Another key element, other than just growing flowers next to vegetables, is to grow lots of different kinds of vegetables. This makes the farm more resilient as a business. If something happens, whether it be a weather event, a pest problem, a fertility problem, if you're growing all one thing, you lose completely. If you're growing as many different things as you can, the loss will be smaller. So we grow as many different things as we can on the farm in order to spread out our success, hopefully. We also, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of our techniques for pest control. You'll see here that white stuff covering the ground is called grow cover. We like to start our pest control in the most minimally invasive way possible. So if all of the techniques I've talked about so far haven't done enough, we start with something like grow cover, which has no impact upon the rest of the ecosystem other than excluding insects from that one area. There are other techniques like trap cropping, which is to grow something attractive to a pest and then intentionally destroy it once the pest finds it and hopefully wipe out a whole heap of them. And there's many other techniques, all part of a system called integrated pest management, which is basically the idea that if you're smart about how you grow things, you'll never need to use a single pesticide. And when we do need to use a pesticide, we only use organic products for that on the farm, and we're selective even in that subcategory of pesticides. Highly targeted ones are the only kind that we like to use. Anything that is a broad range insecticide, meaning it will affect any insect it touches, is like dropping a nuke on our ecosystem. When you wipe everything out and you're starting from scratch, the first things that come back are not usually the good ones. So we try as hard as possible to make our impact on the ecosystem as small as possible when we need to go that way. So I'll try and fit a little bit more in the last few minutes here. Those are some of my base principles of farming. Some of the other things you might see if you were to stop by Stone Acres are, we're big on season extension. As Jane mentioned, we have 3 high tunnels, which are very, very simple greenhouses, essentially, with the ground underneath them open, and we're growing the native soil there. The high tunnels allow us to extend our season all the way around the calendar. So this picture was actually taken maybe 3 days ago. We're growing all sorts of different greens in our high tunnels over the winter, and we're doing this without any heat. These are crops that have been selected for being remarkably cold tolerant. All they need is a little protection from snow and wind, and we get beautiful crops out of them all season. And in fact, many of the greens that grow well in winter taste better in winter than at any other time, which Jen will be demonstrating for you. These sort of minimal season extension tools can also be used to expand our repertoire of what we can grow. So in this picture you'll see some artichokes, also taken just a few days ago. Connecticut grown artichokes are not something I have seen in the store yet, but I'm hoping that more and more people will be interested in growing them, since it turns out it can be done without any heat and just some simple layers of protection. Another thing that we've been starting to work on at the farm is integrating livestock, and chickens are the best place to start, in my opinion. They, of all the different livestock, might be the easiest, and they're not easy. So we'll stick with chickens for now. We raise our chickens on pasture, meaning they are outside and they're on the ground, and we move them every 2 weeks or so during the time of year where they can be outside. So they're always on fresh ground, eating new things, so they have a really diverse diet, which, just like us, is good for their health. In the wintertime, we moved them into their own little greenhouse and still gave them plenty of room to run around. So the leaf litter that you see on the ground in there was loaded with all sorts of grains before we let the chickens in there, so they had a lot of digging and searching to do. We also feed them organic livestock feed, and they're a great way to get rid of product that is not suitable for the market anymore. So you'll see one of our farmers, Molly here, is giving them some mustard greens that were a little too bitter and spicy to sell to the restaurants anymore. But it's just a delight to give something like that to the chickens, who absolutely love it. It cuts down on the feed bill for us, and it seems a theory we're working on is that the idea that chickens lay fewer eggs in the winter may be a myth, and we have not seen any drop in our egg production, and we're starting to credit it with a diverse and nutritious diet that's been going through the winter. So 2 or 3 times a week they get 50 pounds of greens to eat. It seems to be keeping them going. So just for contrast, this is cage-free egg production. This is not Stoneacres. It's just interesting to see how much we must love our chickens. And they give us these beautiful eggs, which are a great year-round product for us. So as Jamie mentioned, we do sell our products in a couple of different ways. The CSA is kind of the foundation of our economic model. It's half of our income, essentially. And people who sign up for the CSA, as Jane said, are doing it at a time of year when our cash flows are the lowest and expenses are the highest. Not only do we need to keep paying all of our help to keep working for the next few months while we get the whole system up and running again for another year, but all of the supplies need to be purchased at this time of year as well. And having the CSA members sign up and commit early on lets us know that we're on the right foot for the year. We also sell to the restaurants. We are dealing with about a dozen restaurants for this coming year. Looking forward to that. And the farm stand. The farm stand is a wonderful way for us to move the produce. It's the highest profit margin for the farm because there's no loss to any middleman, and we don't have do wholesale prices for the bulk orders that we do. The CSA members essentially pay wholesale prices as a token of thanks for paying in advance. Restaurant customers obviously pay wholesale. So when you shop at the farm stand, we are very much appreciative. And I think I'll end my talk there and introduce Jen Rothman, who is the director of the Yellow Farmhouse. She's educating people about agriculture and food, and I think the future of my job depends more on her doing her job well than anything else.
No pressure.
Okay, so maybe you can indulge me for just a moment, and what I'd like you to do is think about a memory, a food memory, something maybe recent or something from your childhood, some moment where you just remember something that you ate or a meal that you had, something that sparks an emotion. Does everybody have one? Yes. Okay, and now I'd like you to just spend a few seconds if you're next to somebody to share that memory with them. Tell them what your memory was.
Yes. And they was talking about process, talking about how they do something.
It's a little different, huh?
Like that. Actually, another making.
Okay. How many of you, in your memory, there was somebody else with you? And for how many of you was that a family member or somebody that you cared deeply about? How many included a holiday celebration? Two? Okay. And for how many of you could you remember the way you felt or the smells or the place you were in, maybe even more so than the food that you were eating? Yeah. So, and how did it feel to share? Did you talk to somebody you hadn't talked to before, or did you share a memory that you might not have shared previously? So when I began my career in museum education, we were taught to use objects to tell stories, and we looked to find the threads that connected us to that object. And it was hard sometimes to make people care or be curious about something that was an obscure object. I later started working at a botanical garden, and all of a sudden plants started to make things a little bit easier. People had maybe a greater connection to plants in some way. And then I started working with food. It sort of naturally progressed from plants to edible plants and then to food education. And all of a sudden it was like this weight had been lifted, and it was just so easy to make those connections. People immediately cared about what we were talking about, and you could use food to talk about anything. You could talk about history or science or math. And it was this amazing way to connect people. And so just about a year ago, we founded the Yellow Farmhouse Education Center. With an amazing board of directors, and we're located on Stone Acres Farm in the Yellow Farmhouse, hence the name. And about a year prior to that, Jane had engaged me to pilot some education programs on the farm as part of this phase 1 of Stone Acres Farm. And I used that time to sort of figure out what those stories were that the farm could tell, and also to sort of assess the community. I'm fairly new to the area. We just moved up here about 2.5 years ago, so wanted to understand what else was happening in the region and see what sort of niche there was to fill with the education programs on the farm. And as you know, there's so many amazing organizations, and what I really hope to do with the Yellow Farmhouse is to complement what is already happening, to add to and to not compete. And what I also saw as I explored the area are the roots of this amazing place-based food system. There's so many incredible assets here, from the fish
industry, to the amazing farms, to the restaurants, to the food artisans, and this culinary and agricultural heritage that has really rich and is really deep-seated. But I also saw, and not just here specifically, but just in my experience in food education, that there's this real disconnect with where people knowing where their food comes from or what it takes to get to our table. And understanding sort of the impact that the choices they make as eaters can have on their health or the health of not just the environment, but of their community as a whole. But I sort of had this idea that if we could, through the joy of cooking and eating together, reinstill sort of a value and a priority on where we're getting our food from, that maybe we could start to connect some of those dots for people. And so in one of our early conversations, as we were thinking about what the vision of this organization would be, we talked about this idea of sort of revaluing the food that we have on our table and the way that we share it with others. And I used the dandelion as a sort of metaphor for this idea, because so many of us think of a dandelion, or maybe not so many of us, but so many people think of a dandelion as this thing that we can just get rid of. You go into like Home Depot and it's like, kill the dandelions. And really, this dandelion is such an amazing plant. The leaves, the dandelion leaves are delicious, really nutritious. The roots have been used by Native Americans and to this day to make a tea, as a medicinal tea. The flowers are one of the earliest sources of nectar for our local bee population, and so it's a really important plant for the ecosystem. The roots go really deep down, so they'll tell you when your soil is compacted. If you have a dandelion growing, you can pretty much guarantee that that's a spot where you might want to loosen your soil a little bit. And it also has these roots that will help to break up the soil. And then, of course, the seed head is this completely nostalgic thing that we've all blown the seeds off of a dandelion seed head. And so it did this perfect thing for us in telling us this story about trying to revalue our food. And so now dandelion is our logo. Which is great. But why is it so important, and why do we need to connect people to where their food comes from? And Andy talked a little bit about this, but there's some really stark numbers that that I think are really compelling in terms of why this is important. So this is from the 2012 census, that it compares 2007 to 2012. And you don't have to read all those numbers, I'll summarize it for you. But essentially, the total number of farms in this country has decreased by 100,000 farms in those 5 years. The number of acres in farmland has decreased by 8 million acres. And the only category, when you look at 1 to 9 acres, 10 to 19 acres of the number of farms in those categories, the only category that's increased are farms over 2,000 acres. So all these giant farms are buying up little farms, and they're all in monoculture, which does nothing for soil health, and really has an impact on our climate and on our environment. This is another one that's a little bit older, but all of the red dots on there indicate a 20 farm decrease in that spot. The blue dots represent 20 farm increases, so places where there's been an increase in the number of farms. And if you zoom in on sort of the northeast and Connecticut, you just see it's all red dots. We're just losing. And there's so many benefits, as we know, to eating locally and sustainability. It supports our local economy. It supports a healthier environment. There's fewer food miles. It supports soil health, our wildlife and pollinator populations. It supports our own health by eating less pesticides and eating more nutritious foods. It supports community and just, it builds joy and sort of companionship. It tastes better. It's just more fun to eat locally, I think. And it feels good. It feels like you're doing something good. But of course, there's also tremendous barriers. Cost is a real issue. Access to good food is an issue. Seasonality and availability can be a concern in the Northeast. Lack of knowledge or how to use the food that we have coming to us, and time, just being able to spend the time finding good food and cooking it. And our goal at the Yellow Farmhouse is not to be prescriptive, to not say this is how you should eat, this is what you should be doing, but to share knowledge and understanding so that people can make decisions that make sense for their own families. and to empower people as young as 3 years old, that's when we start our classes, to adults to make informed purchasing decisions. And then to do that through the lens of something really delicious, like cooking and eating a meal together. And that if we do that, maybe some of those connections that I mentioned will start to come through again. And so how do we do that? So this could look like a high school class. So this is a high school group that visited us in the fall. I always ask Andy what's growing on the farm, and we use whatever he says I have available to me. And so classes are usually decided a couple days before in terms of what the content would be. This was a group that made a kale and squash soup. And then I asked Andy what sort of work needed to be done on the farm, and these students went out to the back field and crated up all of the squash that was curing out in the field, which saved some time, gave the students sort of an understanding of the kind of work that farmers do, and a conversation about seasonality. We might take carrots and make a carrot dip, and then talk about seed breeding and who's growing our seeds for us, and who's making the decisions about which seeds are coming to market, and why do we only see one kind of carrot in the store and not the 20 different varieties that you can find in the seed catalog. We might do an apple tasting where we talk about personal preferences and, again, breeding and traits and the kinds of things that people look for, like crunchiness and size and color and shininess. And we talk about how some varieties might be really good for baking because they're really big and there's not as many to pour, but others are really good for sticking into a lunchbox, and how variety can be a real benefit. It might look like having a group of teachers come to the farm. We do a lot of professional development for teachers. And this was a barn raising we did. We built tried to build some of the chicken coop for the winter chickens, the winter home for the chickens. But it gave teachers an opportunity to just get outside of their classroom, clear their head, have conversations with each other, talk about their curriculum. And this was during a full day of workshopping where they also did some cooking together and lesson planning. Or met with Andy and talked about ideas for their own school gardens or for how to incorporate farming or food education into their existing curriculum. It might be a visit out to the chickens where we talk about what the difference is between pasture-raised chickens and cage-free and free-range, and some egg collecting, and then maybe inside to do some frittata making. Or a dinner on the farm with chefs paired with farmers from the region, where they, for the month leading up to the dinner, had conversations about what they were growing, how they got into food production, how the chefs got into the work that they did, and then really working together to create these lovely dishes for a group of people who were very purposely seated at tables with people they didn't know, so they were having new conversations and building new memories. And so for my final piece, I thought what I would do is actually kind of go through one of the classes that we might have done or would have done recently. So I'm going to move over to this table. And I think, can you all hear me if I talk loud? I'm pretty good at projecting what I'm teaching. But one of the things we're doing recently, for example, as Andy talked about, is taste testing winter spinach and spinach from the grocery store. And this is an organically grown spinach. It's from California. And you see it in Big Y. I forget the name of it. I have it back there. But it's the Big Y organic spinach, if you've ever seen those sort of plastic containers. It's a good spinach. But we taste test for the difference because in the wintertime, has anybody ever tasted fresh winter spinach? You will tonight. It's so much sweeter because the starches, to get through the cold weather, turn to sugars to keep the plants alive. And so you get a really different flavor in winter spinach. Same thing with like parsnips or beets in wintertime or kale. It just has a really different flavor. And so we're going to taste test the Stone Acre spinach that was harvested, when was this harvested? Yesterday, today?
Noon.
At noon. And the spinach from California, which was, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks ago. So I think what I'll do is I'll pass it around, and as that's going around, take a piece of spinach from the store-bought, take a piece of spinach from the Stone Acres, and just taste them next to each other and see if you can notice. It's a subtle difference, I think, but it's
You want to take one off?
yeah, you have to work together. Building community. And so then what we might do, so with the group, we'll do this taste testing. If it's warm enough, we'll go out to the greenhouses and we'll do the harvest with the kids or with the teachers. And then we'll do the taste. We'll talk about the difference in texture and size and uniformity of the leaves. And then we might make a really quick pesto. So we would take some spinach that we had harvested. We would start to introduce different tools. So one of those is this mezzaluna. This is a really great tool for especially little kids, like 3-year-olds, to chop, because 2 hands on the handle mean no hands underneath. And so it gives kids autonomy and confidence to start cooking, and parents and caregivers who are with them to see, oh, right, my kid can do this. And so they're going to chop the spinach, or they might chop the garlic into pieces. We might have them shred some Parmesan cheese, and I've been searching for this grater for, I don't know, 10 years. This is the best graters from IKEA. I'm not doing an advertisement for them, but it has these like rubber things that hold still, and it goes on its side instead of standing up like this, and it grates back and forth. And so I don't know if everybody has ever tried to grate something with kids, but it's impossible. They cannot use that. I can't use the up and down grater. And so this is a great thing. And so that and it has this. And you would just dump that in, a little bit of garlic and some olive oil and some salt, and we would get that mixed together and make a really quick pesto. And you can do that with kale, you can do that with carrot tops. Carrot tops make a really delicious pesto, and it's a great conversation about food waste. And so I think we have samples of that as well that we're going to pass around during our Q&A. And so it's just sort of an overview of what we're doing at the Yellow Farmhouse. We're new, we're just building, but we are really looking forward to being a part of this community and hopefully helping to change the conversation. So thank you. I think questions, right? Yeah.
Go ahead and use this mic.
And could you tell a difference with the flavor of the spinach? I feel like the Stone Acres, the way I describe it is it just tastes more spinachy. That's a word, but you can start to taste maybe the earthiness a little bit, right? Yeah. Does anybody have any questions? Or everybody's too busy eating? That's good. So the question was, what? Bees. Yeah, Lynn Hancock. The question was, are we doing anything with bees or butterflies?
None of us personally are. A woman named Lynn Hancock is our bee specialist. She comes and brings her own hives onto the farm. I think she's got about half a dozen.
Yeah, I was going to say 6, yeah.
Half a dozen hives that she positions right near one of the vegetable fields, and so all summer long we're ducking under the bees as they zip in and out of there. So not directly, but yes, they are.
We have them
involved.
on site, yeah.
Yep.
Can you tell us again, is this pesto is?
Oh, so the pesto is spinach. It's a spinach pesto with the spinach that was harvested at noon, and some garlic, Parmesan cheese, and then I use I try to use more neutral oil, like a grapeseed oil, just because it doesn't add that spiciness, just so you can taste the spinach a little bit more. Yes, not the olive oil.
Big difference.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Jane mentioned, I believe, earlier on that you have about 70 acres of land.
Yes.
How much of that land is farmable, and what percentage of the farmable land have you started to farm? I mean, what's your capacity compared to your current usage?
So I would say there's probably about 18 to 20 acres that could be farmed, meaning just that it's open space without anything growing on it. A lot of it has been cut for hay over the past couple decades. At this point, we are using as of this season, we're starting to use one more of the fields that's open. We'll be using about 70% of the space that we could use.
70% of the 18.
Yes.
Right, and so the space that we have actual vegetables planted in the ground this year is going to be about 4.5 acres. And so you lose, we have to have space around the edges of the growing areas and stuff. So, the field is 5 acres, but we're only growing 3.5 when you count your headlands and stuff. And I also leave quite a bit of space around the edges of fields just to let the native grasses and stuff grow. I let them get pretty tall during the summer because, again, that's supporting the biodiversity of the farm, to let the native plants do what they want to do as much as possible without it all turning into shrubland.
I'm kind of curious, thank you. My question does not relate to Dan Meiser. Describe to me how picky a restaurateur can be when they come to your farm and want to select vegetables and so forth. So I'm sure Dan is a perfect gentleman.
Yeah. Dan and his partner James Wayman are what every farmer wishes for when they need a chef customer. But as you can imagine, sometimes you want to bash your head against a wall after a conversation with a chef. They want such particular things. So it runs the whole gamut. You've got chefs like James Wayman who are like, give me the roots from your lettuce plants. I'm going to make a cool soup stock with them. To people who want a nasturtium blossom that's almost open but not quite and not longer than 1/4 inch. So the whole gamut.
And I would add to that, we do a lot of education too about the idea of letting the farm tell you what you should eat versus you sort of telling the farm what to eat, and that's education that can be for chefs as much as it is for families. It's why the CSA is so amazing, because you're really, like, it's that whole you get what you get and you don't get upset attitude. Like you're getting from the farm what is growing, and so it allows a farmer, I think, to be able to plant more diversity, to include more different kinds of plants, and it's sort of this idea of, instead of sort of farm to table, going a little bit further to something like farm-powered kitchens, where you're really eating to support the soil health, as opposed to sort of cherry picking just the things you want. So I think there's education across the gamut in terms of that idea.
Yep.
I noticed your CSA program offers a lot of flexibility this year. It's not a one-size-fits-all, which I thought was pretty cool. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we decided to really rethink the way that the CSA operates. We had found that even happy customers or happy CSA members weren't returning, and we decided to try an approach that was a little bit more flexible, more in line with the way people are used to getting food, which is to be able to choose what they want. That said, they still have to choose from what we're growing, but it gives people a lot more flexibility of what they're going to take home, when they want to come get it, and how much they want to get. So we offered as many freedoms as possible within the CSA system this year.
Did that work for you?
So far, so good.
It has worked. I mean, we have, I would say, almost 100% more sign up for memberships versus this time last year, which is great. And I think a lot of that has to do with the flexibility, but also the access. I mean, you look at a CSA membership and you have to pay up front, and the 2 shares that we had last year were $450 and $600, which is still a significant amount of money. So there was, so certain demographic that was signing up for the CSA. This year we have shares from $120 for the season, so it's $10 a week, up to $1,200, $100 a week. So it really is that sort of flexible access throughout, which is great.
Is it food and flowers?
We have a flower CSA as well. We have a spring flower CSA for 4 weeks and a summer flower CSA as well. Yes, so food and flowers. Yes.
Andy, I was surprised to hear you say that you're growing clover underneath some of your plants. Don't the roots of the clover choke out the roots of the plants that you're good plants that you're trying to grow?
No, they don't. There are certain pairings of plants that are not mutually beneficial, but there's a lot of space for many roots in the soil. So the thing that I worry about more than physical crowding with that, you would notice in that picture that the kale is much taller than the clover. So from the sunlight crowding is more important to me. And then when I'm thinking about roots in the soil together, there are certain plants that have what's called an allelopathic effect, meaning that they produce chemicals that inhibit the growth of other plants. So sunflowers are a great example of that. Sunflowers actually excrete chemicals through their roots to keep other plants around them from growing. So that is my main concern, but the clover actually adds nitrogen to the soil, which is a huge nutrient for the plants. Clover is a member of a family called legumes that is everything from peas to the Russian olives that grow out in abandoned fields. And they can all take nitrogen from the air and turn it into a plant-accessible form that's in the soil.
The reason I was asking was that we have zoysia grass.
Okay.
And our zoysia grass is being overtaken by clover.
That's impressive. I've never seen anything beat zoysia.
Well, we didn't think it would happen either, but it is.
Okay.
And maybe you're not accountable.
It may be a situation where the conditions in the soil are slightly more favorable to the clover, and so natural balance is just taking its course. But it's hard to say. It's hard to say. But generally speaking, I think what the problem is there is that the clover probably gets a little taller and is robbing it of sunlight. But you got to be a detective to figure these things out.
You provide recipes with your citizens?
Yes, we do.
Yep.
On a weekly basis. Yep.
What's your biggest source of concern regarding pest control?
In general or on our farm?
Why, just on your farm? Yeah.
My biggest concern is to stay away from broad-range insecticides. So there's a really commonly used organic, I don't even think about using anything that's not organic, but there's a common organic one called pyrethrin. It's derived from daisies. Sounds really innocent, but it's a contact killer for many, many, many kinds of insects. And as I said, when you use something like that, you're basically eliminating the entire ecosystem rather than the problem. And pests are always faster to come back. So I really worry about destabilizing the larger system. I had to use a product called Azadirac, I'm going to mess up the pronunciation, azadactrin this past summer, which is organic and it interferes with the molting process of beetles. So very specific. But I went out and I was using it at like 4 in the morning when I thought everything else is going to be off the plants. And it's something that had to be consumed in order to have any effect on, so it's not a contact effectiveness. And I was still paranoid that I was going to affect some beetle other than the one I was trying to get. So I don't like to spray anything. I guess that's an easy way to answer. My concern is having to spray something. I don't like doing it.
What do you do to keep the deer off the property?
Dogs.
Yeah, no, I try and grow things near the edges of the fields that deer would like. So when they come into contact with the field, they're kind of inclined to follow that path. We also use a lot of fish fertilizer. So that's a liquid fertilizer, liquefied fish, and it smells like liquefied fish. And it keeps the deer less interested in coming into the field. And so we start up using that basically once a week, or every time it rains during the summer, we'll go out and at least do the perimeters of the fields with it. And it's effective enough at discouraging the deer that we haven't had to go with anything else at this point. It does lose its effectiveness when deer migration season begins and your friendly cohort that's learned the ropes disappears and, strangers come in. So we try and just get everything out of the fields by November, which is when they really start getting desperate for some fresh green food.
So you don't like disturbing the soil, so how do you prepare the soil for your plants?
Yeah. Right now we still use a tiller. I try and limit it to no more than 2 tillings per year. One to get it ready in the spring, and one later to plant a cover crop. I'm trying to get to even less than that. So truthfully, I don't know the answer completely yet, but we're going to start experimenting with some other techniques, such as using cover crops that will winter kill or die over the winter. And so when spring comes, they're just a dead mat on the surface. And we do a lot of our planting by transplant, so we can put plants right through that into the soil. And that would basically be an in-place mulch. So that's something we've already done it a little bit, and it works for some things. But when you're talking about like baby greens, you kind of need a freshly prepared bed so that you don't have dead cover crops in your salad. So we're trying some of that, and there are also different levels of disturbance. So a rototiller is going in 6 to 9 inches. It is doing the egg beater to the soil. It's really pulverizing it. And it's also creating this sort of like smooth layer at the bottom of where it can go that becomes compacted and hard for water to get through. So you can do a lot just by going in there and pulling things out by hand and raking the bed before you replant it. You're still disturbing it, but it's so much less invasive than putting it through a rototiller session. So when I say we do minimal tillage, we do that kind of thing whenever we can. We don't just use the rototiller because it's fast and easy. It is fast and easy. Nope. Sorry. I'm pointing at everyone.
Okay, one last question. We have a vegetable garden, and every year we say we're going to have the soil tested. And when the soil tested, and whatever comes back, we will then put in the correct fertilizers or whatever to balance the soil out.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have your soil, or do you test your soil regularly, and do you do anything about it?
Yes, I actually just finished crunching the numbers for what we need to do for the fields this year today. We put in that order. I use Yukon for doing the soil testing, and they give a pretty good analysis. So when I look at it, I then look at what options are available for minerals and organic fertilizers and find the ones that I kind of do it in a 2-part process where I look to the non-soluble minerals to kind of level out all the nutrients, get them all about where they should be, and then we use an organic general purpose fertilizer at the time of plantings. Because nitrogen is difficult to just add to the soil and have it stay around. There are forms of nitrogen that are much more stable and less water soluble and won't just wash out with your next rain, but the best nitrogen comes from incorporating organic matter into the soil. So we generally add that as a last step right before planting.
I'm going to ask the last question. If we'd like more information about your educational offerings or farm dinners, how do we find out?
I'm sorry. I didn't hear the question. Sorry.
Channels for talking.
I know.
If we want more information about educational offerings
Oh, yeah.
or farm dinners, how can we get it?
On our website. So we both have calendars on our website, and we're really using that as a tool. So
Do you have newsletters or?
we send out emails as well. So if you go to our website and sign up for emails, you can get them on a weekly basis. stoneacresfarm.com.
StoneAcresFarm.com. With that, thank you so much.